Are you there, Gavin? No, not yet.
He said he might be a minute late, so just go.
We're all going though. Alrighty, welcome back everyone for the first workshop of the year, annual planning workshop predominantly and some other things. We might just go around the room just to introduce everyone, just for those that are watching online, can see who's in the room. We've got Councillor Oliver will join us at some point. Oh, he is there? No? Oh, welcome, Councillor Oliver, and Councillor Burt is an apology. But otherwise, I'll go to you, Councillor Piddington.
Afternoon, Councillor Michelle Pye.
Good afternoon, Councillor Scotty Shannon.
Good afternoon, Nigel Traynor, CEO.
Good afternoon, Andrea Rankin, CFO.
Steph Ford, Corporate and Strategic Planner.
I'm Stephen Doran, I'm GM of Corporate and Communications.
Councillor Stacey Scott.
Kia ora, Councillor Owen Jackson.
Councillor Sally Parker.
Councillor Alan Booth.
Okay, thanks for coming everyone today. So this is our first workshop where we're kicking off towards next year's annual plan. The annual plan should be reflective of year 2 of the long-term plan that you fixed last year. So today we're going to give you a really high-level overview of the process and what the legislative requirements are. We'll give you some of the key concepts of an annual plan and what's special about it, and then summary of where the current state of the budget is, some options and levers that you could pull to make any changes to it, and then overview of the capital programme and some of the key projects that you're wanting to progress over the next couple of years, and then leave it open for your discussion and any over high-level directions you can give us, and hopefully our team here can answer any questions you have. Steph will be taking the lead through this. This is her baby. So I'll hand over to her.
Thanks. So yeah, as Stephen said, today is just more an overview of what is actually included in year 2 of the long-term plan that you adopted last year. There will be a few wee updates that we know of to go into amend minor changes, I guess we'd call them at this stage. But yeah, it's not really a full relitigation of the long-term plan. As much as we can, we'd like to continue with year 2 where possible. Oh, is this not working now?
Oh, and what?
Oh. One moment, caller. There we go. So just to refresh everyone's memory, what is the annual plan? So in the LGA, it's got some LGA wording, but ultimately it is the annual budget funding impact statement for the year in question, which for us is year 25-26, which is year 2. It identifies any variation from the financial statements we have in the long-term plan. Although we're looking at year 2 kind of in isolation, you still need to give view to future years as well, so not making a rod for your back in future years with things like debt caps, yeah, in isolation but with a broader view. And it also contributes to council's accountability with the community, so confirming what we're doing, when we're doing it, how we're doing it, and how it's funded. It is exceptions based, so like I said, we're not relitigating the whole long-term plan. We made the plan last year for the 10 years. We want to try to stick to it as much as possible because it does have quite far-reaching impacts if you make big decisions in year 2. So this is our planning and reporting cycle. Currently we're in the navy blue. Then we'll move into annual report. So at the moment with the annual plan we're not foreseeing what we call a long-term plan amendment, which is quite a big change. We'll talk more about that later. But if that was to come to fruition for this, it would likely put the annual report deadline at risk. We've had conversations with audit already. hoping that we don't have a long-term plan amendment, but if we do, that could be a consequence.
The long-term plan amendment needs to be audited.
Cool, so following on from that, we talk about what Andrea was just talking to, which is the auditing of an LTP amendment. So for that, you have to follow the full SCP, which is the special consultative procedure. That is for the really big stuff, so that's things like significant changes to your agreed levels of service, so they're the performance measures under each group of activity, which would then obviously affect the activity as a whole. There is also things like transferring ownership of what is considered strategic asset as far as our significance and engagement policy is concerned. And then also, if you're not transferring ownership, but transferring control of that. So if you were to create more CCOs, things like that, that would be considered an LTP amendment.
That's where one of the tricky balances you've got to think here is that you can shape it in some ways, but you can't go too far off the plan or it triggers a lot of work.
Sorry, can I just ask a question around, so how does that work for water reform, building, whatever that thing's called?
Yeah, so that's what we're still working through at the moment. The Legal Services Manager is unpacking the latest bill just to figure out how we work it. And also we're probably going to look to some of the bigger councils and see how they're tackling it. Yeah, it's a known unknown is the best way to describe it at the moment, because the water services plans aren't due with central government until September, which is after our annual plan period. So that one's a bit tricky. We're still unpacking and we'll see how we go.
And any changes would probably be an FY 26, 27 by the time they came round, and hopefully the government would think up some magic way to facilitate any changes as well.
Yeah, but also with LTP amendments, they can be done at any time. It's just most councils try to align them with the annual plan process, because generally you're consulting in some way on the future year anyway, so but they can be done at any time if something major happens. Then there's consultation, which is a bit broader. So that is where we would apply some sections of the Local Government Act, but council has a bit more leeway on what it deems significant or material changes to things. We've got it pretty clearly defined in our policies, which is good, but ultimately council still has a bit of discretion. But then if you decide to consult, then Section 82 principles apply, and you have to make sure you follow them to ensure that the community have a chance to have their say on anything that impacts them.
And we have consulted in the past, even when we've not gone as far as an amendment, but it's more of a, here is what's in this year of work. Here are some tweaks we're proposing, what do you think about it? And it's different in a way that it's people just providing feedback rather than there's no hearings and no all that kit and caboodle.
Yeah, but council has the option to include hearings and give the public an opportunity to come and speak to their submissions if they wish, which is generally the approach that's been taken in the past too. Any questions on consultation? Cool. So this is our current timeline as at last Friday with no LTP amendments. We are working with managers and group managers at the moment to understand what budget changes they may possibly need. That will include any capital works that might need to be deferred into next year with project delays, things like that. We have workshops today and a few more through February and March. During that time, we'll be preparing any material for a consultation document, should it be required, and should council want to undertake consultation. Towards the end of that, we'll go and talk to the community boards just to make sure they're across what is happening, and also invite their feedback into any issues they think need to be considered. We'll look to adopt the consultation document on the 1st of April. Consultation, if we're going to go through with that, will then run 10 April to 10 May, but depending on how much you want to consult on will depend on the time frame that you want to put to that. It won't have to be 4 weeks if it's not a full SCP, but it can be. While the consultation's running, generally office commenting and collation of all the submissions happens as they come in, so we don't have a big rush at the end. And then we would look to have hearings if required on the 27th of May, which would then give us another month to finalise all the content for the document and get it ready to adopt on the 24th of June. Just want to reiterate, this is all subject to move, depending on what else comes out with conversations with managers on budgets and projects, but ideally this is the time frame we're looking at the moment. Any questions?
Probably one for the CE, really. I just get a bit nervous with budget reviews and change requests. I presume, Nigel, you're making it clear there is no more money. But I'm serious about that, because it's no point coming with a whole lot of $1 million requests when we're actually trying to drive down expenditure.
Yes, they're very clear on that. Change requests potentially could go both ways, savings and or cost increases. Things like, what are we doing for the maintenance of our buildings and things like that. The other thing to note is this timeline is assuming we're consulting. We may not need to consult, and that'll be a call for council when we get to that point, and that'll change the timeline significantly. There are councils in the South Island who are not going to consult. They're just adopting year 2 as it is.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my position. If possible, my question would be, at some point we do have to consult on water, so do you include that or do you keep it separate?
The water, that will come after this. So we've got to have our water delivery plan done by September. So
what's our consultation timeline with community for that then? It must be this half of the financial.
I've got the wrong person in the room for that.
I could probably speak to it. I mean, it would be when we're getting to the final shape of what we want at the moment, and we take it out to the community with that information to get proper sort of informed feedback from the community, so you could understand what their feelings were about it. You'd need quite a bit more information, and it probably would be sort of just prior to submission, so that kind of July, August, September area.
I mean, the question is, does the council want to push forward at a rapid pace, because some councils are going to have new water entities, CCOs, up and running by 1st of July, or do we just want to deliver on the water service delivery plan by September, consult and look to put any changes into place after that with the new financial? So it sort of depends where we want to go, doesn't it?
I think that's correct. It depends on where we're heading.
Yeah,
so we're going to be having workshops soon that'll give us more clarity on that.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Cool. Oh my God, it's done it.
Could you go to the PowerPoint?
Yeah. Cool, so these are the key council dates that I've pulled out of that timeline for you all. So we've got the workshop today, obviously. We've also got 18th of February earmarked as well. That'll probably be a bit more of a deep dive with Andrea into the finance once the reforecast is complete, and we've got a good idea of where things are at based on that. Then I've also got a tentative date for the 18th of March as well. Yeah, depending how things progress, and maybe if you do want to include some more of the water stuff in there, then we'd probably want to lock that one in as well. At this stage, if we do have a consultation, then we would look to adopt the consultation document on April. As mentioned before, the consultation period 10 April to 10 May, council hearings if required, and then adoption on the 24th of June. We can adopt up until the last day of June, but the 24th looks good to me. Any questions on any of those timeframes?
more the time frame with audit, so we just don't live it. I mean, that's why you're trying to bring everything forward.
Well, we,
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if we don't do an LTP amendment,
Yeah.
we
get
don't need
audited.
audit.
So no audit sign-off. So we're all good to go.
we won't be surrounding on the computer on the 31st waiting for an email to arrive.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's fine. That's fantastic. Wow. It's going to be a good year.
Yes, it is. So this one here, the key concept groups of activities, you're all pretty familiar with those now, but just reiterating, community services, that name change used to be community support. Environmental services, now called district planning and environmental services. Sewer is wastewater, and that's about it with the groups. So levels of service, just a quick recap on what that actually refers to. So it's an agreement with the community about services council will provide, so that's what you get for your rates. The agreed budget provides the necessary funds to meet the agreed level of service. So for example, if level of funding is reduced for an activity, then the level of service will likely be reduced. In general terms, not always the case, but generally. So overview of OPEX and CAPEX. OPEX is generally day-to-day expenses, largely rates or fee funded. CAPEX is mainly physical works on council activities, including renewals, growth, which generally captures your new things, your acquisitions, and increasing your level of service. And it is largely loan funded with an asterisk, sometimes depreciated funded, depending on the activity. So the financial parameters for the annual plan should generally fall within what is set in the financial strategy with the LTP. So our debt to revenue limit is set at 250% or 2.5 ratio. And at this stage, when the LTP was set, year 2 was not forecast to be a balanced budget. It is forecast to be a deficit. So, current state of the budget. This is your everyday costs. So where we are is 25-26, and when the LTP was set, we're forecasting just under a $4.8 million deficit. Hopefully we'll get that better. Hopefully. And that is based on the 12% rates increase and everything proceeding as planned. The revenue and expense snippet, key things to note again there, the 4.8 million deficit. You're all pretty familiar with those tables. We went through them multiple times with the LTP. The funding impact statement. And continued for the capital. Key point to note there is for 25-26, our forecast capital spend at the time we set the LTP was 92 and a bit million. This year was 91, and the assumption in the long-term plan is that we were going to deliver 100% of our capital program. So, as this slide states, the forecast deficit for 25-26 is based on the planned and agreed 12% rates increase on average, with all capital projects proceeding and no levels of service amendments. So, to address the deficit and budget challenges, you've got a few different levers you can pull. All the levers have different consequences or flow-on effects. So you could increase the loan funding to or beyond the current debt cap, so you could go up to 280%, which would require changing your financial strategy, but that is an option. You could increase general rates more than what is in the LTP, so higher than the 12%. You could reduce OPEX, and there's a few different ways to do that, but normally, as mentioned before, it would result in a lower level of service for a lot of activities. You could increase fees and charges, so for year 24-25 you did a 15% increase on the fees that we could increase, noting that some are set by legislation. In years prior, you've done a compounding 5% increase, so that's something to think about too with your fees and charges. We could look to maximise or access other central government funding or other funding streams that we haven't in the past utilised. You could sell some assets. There was one other thing up there that I hadn't put in, and that is funding depreciation. So you'd plan to fund depreciation at around 77% for next financial year. Another lever to pull is you could lower that depreciation funding, depending on where you're comfortable with. Or you could do a mixture of all of the above, some of the above, or none of the above. Any questions? Cool. So this one's an overview of what capital projects are in the 10-year plan. Some of the projects flow into various years. We do know there are a couple of knowns with regards to some of the capital projects that'll be carry forwards of capital funds into future years. One of the bigger ones is Claremont. They're still finalising designs, I believe, for that project, so the spend this year will be lower than anticipated. Moving into the next slide. Oh, sorry, OJ.
Sorry, can you just refresh me on wave, band and dam safety, that 2.1 million? Just refresh my memory on what that's about.
That one, no, so I'm pretty sure it relates to wastewater, is that correct? Wave, band and dam safety. Yep, so not the Perry-Road Dam. Gosh, that was a hard question. And then in the next slide, we look at roading with the government policy statement and then subsequent NZTA funding. There are a couple of, I guess, changes in priorities from central government on what roading programs they were funding. So roading and Mr Dixon are working through what that means on a practical level, where the gaps are, but also on the flip side to that, our team was successful in securing some Crown Resilience funding too for other projects, so yeah.
Can you just remind me, please, those are excluding grants and subsidies, these roading figures?
So that is the total project spend.
The total project spend, so that is excluding that? That includes the grants, okay, thank you.
Seems to be a bow wave coming up, 28, 29 and everything. Is that, what's the deal with that?
Yeah, so those are basically smoothed across the 10. Yep, and the figure in the middle is the total figure for that whole period. Yep.
Just a question, sorry. And I know this is a historic document, but when I look at Theatre Royal at 57 million, can we split that and the museum cost out, and can we be more accurate? Because this is the sort of thing that undoes us in the public. They say we're going to spend this, and next minute we put out a document with a different number.
Yeah, so with the annual plan, you actually publish a separate document, and then best practice would then be to go and update different versions of the long-term plan with what's agreed in the annual plan, and then publish those versions as the annual plans are adopted and published. Yeah. So yeah, on that, theatre and stadium, probably not going to spend what they had planned to spend this year, so that will obviously defer into next year and possibly subsequent years depending on how construction goes. Yeah, so this next slide is just generally to get an idea from you all. Obviously, we're in a workshop, we can't make any formal decisions, but just to get an idea of where your thinking is at with a few of these questions. Yeah. So has anyone got any non-negotiables for this annual plan that you would want us to keep progressing with? Anything in particular, other than obviously maybe investigate how water is going to further impact?
I guess my dream would be that the rate increase was under 10%. And, and if everyone knows that, it's something to go towards. So that,
5?
yeah.
Yeah, but we can skip to that.
In discussion talk,
Yep.
it sits on top of all that, surely. So we don't go off and spend a whole lot of money.
Yep, so we can talk about that if you'd like. Where you guys are comfortable with the rate increases, because obviously we've got 12% in the plan based on everything progressing as planned, but...
So I guess one thing we've got to remember is that a 12% increase gave us a $4.8 million deficit. So we have $4.8 million to catch up to get to zero. And then depending on if you wanted it at 10, then that's potentially another $2 million, $3 million, I don't know the exact figure, but then that's an additional savings that needs to be found somewhere. So then those questions around levels of service, those questions around what do we do, what do we don't do, yes, we can make savings in some areas, but, what are we foregoing by not doing that? So I guess we've just got to be conscious of that as well as we work through this process.
I'm kind of, ideally, I said 5, that would be a dream, but you've got to be realistic about it. First of all, I want to know what effect do the known changes have on the budget? We know interest rates are probably lower than what we had in the long-term plan. We know we're not going to have an interest cost on the theatre because we haven't started that in the stadium and all of those things. So what are the known changes? And in my mind, that's a little bit our starting position. But the other thing that I won't be very popular with some people in the building, but when I think about how grumpy I've got at ECAN progressing stuff that the government has clearly signalled is going to change, the government has clearly said they're going to remove the 4 wellbeings from the Local Government Act. And ECAN's response is always, it's not the law until it's the law. But I can't morally sit here and challenge ECAN about that and then endorse it sitting around this table. So my question is, should we still be funding anything that is to do with the 4 wellbeings? I think these are great programs, but is it council's role to deliver them? And when the government has clearly said that it's not going to be council's role anymore, we should not be putting them in our budget.
I think what we possibly need to do is, at our next workshop, have our 24 budget, where we're at year to date in our forecast for 24-25, and then we need to drive off the next year off that, because there are a number of things that will change, like subsidies and grants. We've got 25.9 and 24-25. We know not all of that will be received. Some of it will be slipped over into 25-26. Yes, they're one thing, but they do actually create a different bottom line. We know that our fees and charges, we've got some areas where we know we're well under. Andrew came to me today, we charge $2.75 a square metre for our land rental on hangars. The norm is about $15 to $20 a square metre. That is a significant change, and we're going to have to bring those forward to say, do we take them on or do we not? Because they do change your bottom line. You've talked about the interest costs. Yes, that will come down because interest rates are dropping, and also we haven't borrowed as much because we haven't done all the projects, and depreciation and amortisation. So we really need to actually get you a 25-26 first cut to see what that looks like. Does that sound reasonable? And there'll be, and potentially some meaty questions in amongst that.
So on that, you've going back to the timeline, budget review and change requests, in theory, has happened?
So the current process at the moment is over the last few weeks, the teams have been doing their forecast for the end of this financial year. So at this point, we're now reviewing all of that and line by line as to, is it reasonable, is it not reasonable, and questioning them. Out of that will then hopefully give us our forecast for the end of this financial year, and then we will look to have a couple of different scenarios come to that 18th of February meeting where here's our forecast, let's just add a percentage on, what do we get, what does that look like, how far away from the long-term plan is it? Because in the back of our minds we've got to be conscious that if we deviate too far from the long-term plan then it will constitute an amendment, audit, consultation, all of the whole works. So then it's, well, okay, how is 24, 25 gone in relationship to where we thought we were going to be? Then that obviously constitutes where 25, 26 could be. And so they'll be the scenarios, and then at that point we'll revisit the interest and those kind of known things. Part of the process is also looking at what capital works are they not going to do this year, that actually, or they might start, they were meant to have started already, theatre, stadium, how far out are they going to go this year versus into next year, but then also then question, well, what was in next year that is then actually going to get moved out again because of the timeliness and what have you going forward. So all of that work will come through to the next workshop to work through those different things, and then as part of that, the different scenarios around what does a 5% look like, what does a 10% look like, what does a 8% look like in general terms when it comes to the bottom lines and how far deficit, ideally not, but that may be that's where it heads with a lower percentage of rates.
I'd be keen to know in operations what we're giving away, and I'll use the example of the sequoia tree in Ashburton. It's hit the news in the last few days. A lady complained she had a big tree and the council always came round kindly and cut it and tidied it up for her. But it wasn't their tree, they had no responsibility. It was a kind of a nice thing to do. Now, I'm just wondering whether we have a list of nice things we're doing that aren't essential. One thing that comes to mind, personally I can't believe, and I brought it up before, we give away all the proceeds from the car parking building at the Farmers Building because someone else manages it. And I know the money gets gifted from that organisation back through, but really we should be getting that money and it should be at a commercial rate for that car parking. So I'm keen to know if we are, those sorts of things.
And the other one we talked about the other day was in regard to car parks, is we hire the one, men do one and then give it away for nothing. So when the clear message from ratepayers, I think about 65%, was they prefer user pay, so that's what they're actually telling us is of the long-term plan.
Okay, yeah, in regard to the farmers car park, we actually collect all the revenues. It comes into the council's coffers, and we pay the operators, which is the Masonic Lodge, basically a normal, a contract fee to manage the car park. So it's a contractual arrangement we have with them. Given that they're a non-profit organisation as such, it's actually a very cheap price for us. And if we went to like Wilson's car parking, we'd probably pay double that. So it is very good value. And of course, the money we actually pay them to run the car park that's the money that they collect and put into the community. So they do not take the car parking fees at all.
Oh, well, that's a different explanation that I got last time round this table. So that's fine, Andrew, but you get my point. We're giving away the car parking at Kathmandu. Explain that to me.
Well, we're not, because again, we don't own that car park. So we lease that car park off the building owner, and we have a right to charge for that car park. Now, the building owner has said we don't want to have it charged, so the building owner pays us an annual fee in lieu of the parking charges. So we actually, and we, are quite generous at what we ask for. We say that there's an occupancy probably higher than what it really is. So we do quite well out of that one as well.
I think the point that Councillor Pittington's making is we have assets such as a multi-million-dollar car park, we're making no return on it. And we also lease one where we'll be making minimal returns. So that's what you're asking for, isn't it? So to how we do it.
Yeah, they're the obvious examples, but I'm concerned in the background, along with some of the leased buildings we have, that we're not getting a commercial return. If we're not getting a commercial return on our assets, we've got to ask why we've got them. That's all I'm saying. I don't want to get, yeah.
Yeah, I think the issue is what is the parking cost in Timaru, and it is extremely cheap. And it's we get $150,000 a year out of the farmers' car park. So yeah, but you know, and there is certainly room to move. It's 80 cents a half hour. It is really cheap, you know. And I think, but we've got to look at our car parking all the way through. Do we raise that? And you know, look at Christchurch, Wellington, those ones. You know, it's 3-4 times that.
Can I ask, one of the discussions I'm very, very keen to have is around levels of service. Now, you know, we understand that drop in funding and anything can lead to a reduced level of service, but we need to actually work through what does that look like if that is the case. Like, for example, are there areas in our business where a reduced level of service is completely palatable for a ratepayer? They might say, no, that's more than what I expect anyway. And especially like when you work through the likes of, 43 million for urban road improvements, 44 million sealed road resurfacing, 49.7 road rehab, 22.1 footpath renewals. You know, is there anything within any of that? And I know that Land Transport and Infrastructure will be quick to say, no, it's all essential. But when we're looking at, new seal and chip in urban areas, for example, I think just about every street that ever gets re-chipped, every person that lives on that street will tell you, we didn't need it. You know, and I know that the engineers will tell us, no, you absolutely did need it, but is this a level of service discussion that potentially can save money? Footpath renewals, do we necessarily need to, just because it's programmed, replace that entire footpath, or can it be dealt with on a pothole type scenario? That sort of thing when I'm talking levels of service. Also, the things that our ratepayers do see, like around town, for example, do they necessarily cost a whole lot of money? And how far do we need to reduce those levels of service really, where it doesn't make as big a difference as this stuff over here? So I want to have a really, really good discussion around levels of service that our ratepayers find acceptable and really, really do understand that if I want this, this is the impact on my rates. If I'm prepared to not have this, that is actually going to be a saving to my rates. Now, I had an experience in Japan a couple of years ago where you could imagine there is not a single bit of rubbish to be seen anywhere. And there's dudes walking around with shovels and brooms all over the city. But you will not find a crack in the road or the concrete anywhere that hasn't got a weed growing through it. Do they care? No, everything's clean. They just weed, it just becomes part of the environment. Are there booms that could perhaps just be native grasses and flowers? Never mow them again. Bit of seed and it's pretty. There's a lot of people that think we should be moving that way. So these are the discussions I want to have. So we're making the right decisions that meet our ratepayers' expectations.
I mean, a lot of that's the political discussion in there is what are you willing to hear from the public, what they will put up with in that regard. Because I know the number of complaints we get about messy berms and stuff like that, and it's realigning people's expectations about that. Because, I mean, if everyone asks, do you want better services at lower prices, they'll probably say yes, but it's not reality for a lot of people. But it's down to then, it's what around the table, your appetite is for that.
Can I?
No,
can I just?
I still don't think so entirely. My point is I want to hear from the officers how much it costs to achieve that level of service and where they think, because the officers, more than anybody, will receive the feedback from the ratepayers. They'll be able to tell you what annoys the ratepayers, and it's probably exactly the same thing that you would just imagine annoys the ratepayers, and the other thing is that, we stopped doing that and nobody said a word. So it's not just a political discussion, it's actually based on what the officers can tell us and the costs attached to those.
I think it's different for different services. There'll be some services where we can continue to deliver the level of service with a reduced cost structure. There'll be other services where you can't do that, such as roading, but are we doing the right roads is probably the question. What I'd like to tease out from councillors, I'm going to change the subject a little bit. In year 2 of our LTP, we had planned for a deficit of 4.8 with a 12% rates increase. So if you manage to still keep a deficit of 4.8 but yet a 5% rate increase, would you be interested in that, or do you want the deficit eliminated? And they are different, very different questions. So there's 2 components to that needs to be thought through. And I think that would be really good direction for us to understand. If we were finding cost savings, are we putting that to reducing rate increases, or are we putting that to reduce the deficit?
Just, I know the numbers are, I'm just looking at the revenue and expense, and I'm looking at our last year annual plan. The budget for our personnel costs was 26.742 million, came in just under that. Yet in the budget 24-25, it's jumped up to 33,132, which is around about 6.5 million. So out of that 9 million that we've taken in extra rates, we're actually spending 6.5 million on personnel, which is actually probably the major problem here, isn't it? Is that just a number that's been put in there, or is this, because that's a 20%, 25% increase. Is there something wrong with that number?
So we are, that's 23-24 says annual plan, so I'd have to go and check what we finished at. Secondly, on the 24-25, we are tracking to that. But we also have a very low turnover.
Looking at that, and that, as I say, it's just, it's a huge jump, and, you know, that we're talking about, and it's, look, it would appear that it's all just going to extra money for the personnel. So that's the first thing we need to address, isn't it?
Yeah, plus you have to also work out that 26 million, how many vacancies did you have?
Operated like that last year, and that's the number that's in actual fact, it come in at 27.189 million is the actual number. And here we are now, you've got in the budget 33,132. So is that just, I'm not sure how that number's come about.
Well, because it got put in here and we all approved it. And that is the number for the staffing levels that were in the organisation when this long-term plan was done.
90% of that 15% increase of rates we just hit everyone with is actually going to go to everyone sitting in this building, according to this.
So didn't we had quite a high vacancy rate as well, though? It was sitting at about 18 to 20%, and now I think it's only about 3 or 4%. So that's what will be impacting that.
It out, it's like, you know, 90% of that increase has gone to the bottom, to the personnel costs, according to this budget.
Will that also be with bringing in the in-house team? Yeah, that we're doing our own gardens. Yeah.
Less consultants and contractors and more direct REM, you're right, Councillor Parker, yeah. Yeah.
Brought in a whole parks team.
For the expenses, other expenses will be going down then, won't they? Because we're actually doing the contractors are out, and so therefore those costs there perhaps should be, if we're employing our own people to do it, should be roughly about probably 2/3 of what we were paying for a contractor. So therefore the contracted services should be coming off the other expenses.
Correct.
I think on that, though, we do need a check and balance and probably a year in to make sure those are achieving the savings. What we've got to be careful of, the organisation, the way it operates, is that, you know, we're expecting efficiencies in those services to be run really sharply, and we've got to test that. Is that happening within council or not, or have our policies just got in the way of actually running a lean fighting contracting machine, if you like? And I do worry that by bringing some of the things in-house, which I'm a big advocate for, if we don't have the right people driving those services, then they don't become efficient. They just end up clogging up the... So
if you've got a $9 million a $7 million extra cost for those contractors, you should be taking 10 million off the other expenses.
Well, we said on those parks hybrid, we would initially get a saving of 200,000, whether that's on wages or across the board. It'll be across the board, so it'll take some time to play out. But the big thing that I want to probably see from this annual plan, and this dates back to December 2023, when we highlighted all the things that we could be saving money on, and that was so it could flow through to the long-term plan, such as, and I know there's been some work with, some of this work has been accelerated now, but I'd like to see a lot of those services, whether they're in-house, outside of house, those business cases presented in a timely fashion, so it needs to be pretty quickly, so we can make some decisions for the 1st of July. And that includes, the trades, that includes reviewing and have council, not SLT, but council, see the business plans on the likes of street sweeping and all of those. We've had, if we take us through to the 1st of July, that's the organisation's had 18 months to deliver on that, so that's plenty of time to me, and those are direct savings that can come off rates when we come through to setting a rate increase.
Just to go back to your question, Mr. Trainer, I've been sitting here pondering it around deficit versus reduction in rate increases, and both would be my answer. We can't, I mean, we've operated in deficits in the past, they haven't been budgeted, they've got to be paid for somehow. If we're not increasing rates to cover deficits, we're just kicking the can down the road, and we're not asking the right generations to be paying. And we've been critical sitting around this table of what's happened in the past where rate rises we thought weren't high enough when they should have been higher. So I couldn't easily sit here and say just reduce the rates, even though I did challenge you with 5% before. We need to be breaking even, but we need to be realistic about it. But what concerns me, and it kind of carries on a little bit from me and Nigel's commentary, is I feel like we're just tweaking around the edges, and if we just keep doing the same, we're going to get the same result, and we just can't. We can't carry on as we are. We need to fundamentally do some different, and whether that's bringing stuff in-house, whether it's getting rid of stuff that we shouldn't be doing anymore, whether it's delivering a service in a different way, whether it's, and I don't mean this seriously, but having the library only open half the time, we've got to change something. We can't carry on how we're going, because we can't afford to, or our ratepayers can't afford to.
I agree, and I think this is meant to come through the LTP, but I don't think we got there, and I don't think that probably senior leadership team quite understood what governance potentially was pushing at. But we should be, through this process coming into this annual plan, I'd like the SLT to be looking at every team member in their respective teams and asking the question of what they are delivering for council, and testing that with each other around the SLT table. And if they're not delivering, then we need to look, actually, is that position, should that stay or should it go? And that's, I think, what the ratepayers are going to be wanting across councils across the country coming into this long-term plan. So that's really important, But that's not just us saying something in the CE, talking to SLT and getting frustrated. It has to come from SLT to be looking really hard at those teams. If you were in a corporate environment, you would be having a look at those things all the time. I wouldn't say I laugh, but when I reflect back about the commentary in the paper over the years around restructures in this council, they're just tiny little tweaks that happen in those big organisations all the time that wouldn't even make the paper. But they're just looking at constant efficiencies in their teams, and that's what I expect of this organisation. And we've got to evolve to that point. And so, ratepayers don't want to see decades-old, sorry, and no disrespect to anyone in this room, it's not targeted, but people doing the same old stuff that they've always done. They want to see efficiency. So you've got to change your mindset from one of old bureaucracy to, nimble, enabling corporate. That's what people expect from us. So that's what I'd like to see from the SLT coming through now to support the Chief Executive, because I think we can make some pretty good changes coming into this 1st of July, but everyone needs to be on board, and there's going to be some hard decisions. You've just got to get over it. Unfortunately, you've got to think about the people that we work for, and they're out there in the streets. Shows you haven't done enough talking over the summer break.
Look, I totally agree. I do think in councils we get too relaxed. I think some areas, if it was your own personal budget, you'll make cuts, but because it's council and it's a hard decision, we don't. People will shoot me for this, but, do libraries need to be open on public holidays? When everyone's running away, I don't know. Have we got any stats? Can we save money? We've got a swimming pool that's losing a couple of $100K a year, and we're just not brave enough to make the decisions around these things. And I don't know what the answer is, but we can't just keep, as the Mayor said, ticking along. But the thing that grinds my gears the most is the fact we don't oversee the contracts we have. Andrew, I would have loved to put every call I had in the Christmas break over the state of grass, lawns. We're paying people to deliver this. Why do we not have the oversight of them? I'd love to present an invoice to you guys, 10 grand a month, and do nothing. Because in effect, that's what I think some of our contractors aren't doing. It's not our problem if they're short-staffed or someone's on holiday. I can give you a list, but it just seems to go nowhere. Our own car park, I've had 2 complaints of the length of the weeds growing in the car park at the farmers. And that's our own car park. And I know they're only little things, but it's kind of reflective, I think, of how we operate. Oh, well, she'll be right. Well, it won't be. And the flip side I take on from the CE, we've got issues like the Geraldine Theatre that's just been kicked down the road. We've got other things that we just took out of the budget, building maintenance. If we do need to maintain our buildings, and that has to be a cost, but let's know what it is, please. Not go, we took that out of the budget, remember? Because I don't. I thought we'd be maintaining our assets. So, I know it's a double-edged sword and it's hard on everyone, but we're going to have to be really brave if we're going to make some changes and save some money.
And on that contract, it's 5 years I've been in this role now, and it just gets worse. Every summer, it's me that's got to pick up the phone and talk to someone about weeds growing. And you'd think we would be driving that, because I'm pretty sure we've got 300 staff that drive and bike and walk past the same stuff I'm seeing, but I've got to bring the stuff up every year. And then at the last LTP, we did not change any level of service. We did not have that conversation, but for some reason, in certain places, the money's been pulled. So we've had no explanation of that. So someone's not doing their job, either contractor, whoever's managing the contract from our point of view, or our in-house team, because we've taken some of that in-house. So it's quite easy to find where the problem is. So we just need to have some accountability through our management team. And it feels like, and I'm at the point now, after 5 years, Honestly, this wouldn't have survived in my business. There would have been people gone. So somewhere along that chain, someone needs to take accountability. And I actually think it's time that when you're not accountable, we actually get rid of some people, because this is frustrating. 5 years of frustration. I think actually we need to push go. People have KPIs they've got to hit, they've got contracts. Deliver or go. It's quite simple. If you don't want to do your job to the highest standard, don't be here. Go somewhere else. Everyone has that choice.
So I think from here, the best thing to figure out is maybe what content you want to discuss at which workshops. I think we've established that we definitely need at least one March one, so you can talk through options for level of service and actual costs with managers. Would you prefer to do the high-level financials first, or would you rather do activities first, figure out where that sits, and then move on to what the scenarios could be with rates? I mean, it's really a chicken and egg situation because they both talk to each other, but it's which way round you'd prefer the information.
It's kind of a chicken and egg, a wee bit. I'd like to see the high level to see where we're at.
Yep.
And that shouldn't take too much, hopefully.
Well, you'll be seeing some of that through the standing committees meeting anyway. So you're going to get a bit of that through commercial and strategy. So whether you want to get that there, and then that same day after standing committees have finished, we've got a workshop scheduled, so you could talk about some of the activities then, or whether you wanted to carry on with the finance chat and then do activities.
I mean, what I'd really like to say is each of those activities find a 10% saving. You tell us. We're not experts in roads, swimming pools, contracts, but other organisations do that, you know. Air New Zealand lost 20% of their staff and still flew the planes, you know. Not out of Timaru. Occasionally, but you know what I mean.
My question to Mr Trainer is, if we go, right, we want to look at 5, 8 and 10% rate increases, and you go, yeah, you bring them back, and then, because that way the SLT then go, well, right, if it's 8, what the hell are we going to cut to achieve that? So to me, it's finances before.
I agree with that. I have a slightly different view, because just because we can afford to do something doesn't mean we should do it. So I kind of feel like we should be going, every activity, what do we stop, what do we start, and what do we do differently? And at the same time, the finances kind of feed into that. But, you know, and using, I don't want to pick on the library, but it just seems to be the topic of the day. You know, should it be open all the time it's open, or what you know, should we, yes, deliver those library services, but within shorter hours, and not on public holidays or whatever it is. So I kind of feel like, finances aside, we need to be really clear about what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be. And I'd revert back to that, I know it's controversial, but the delivery of the full wellbeing programs that we do.
I think to get a scenario, as Councillor Scott said, to you, 5, 8 and 10, those very questions will have to be asked, and we'll have to work those through, and you'll get back, if we have 5% and whatever the bottom line result, less than 4.8 deficit, hopefully break even, here's what's got to change. Some of that's difficult because you're butting up against employment law too. We have to think that through, but we can do it.
Yeah, and I think the key there is not necessarily a project worth this much, dump that gives us the saving. It's like what you're just saying, Chief Executive, and you, Councillor Pye, and it again ties into expectations of levels of service. What we don't need to do and how much that costs, what we do need to do, how much that costs, what we can change in doing that to still meet, because at the end of the day, it's what the ratepayer wants here still, isn't it?
And what we've got to do is there are some services, while they need to be delivered, we may not be the best entity to deliver them.
100% agree, and that's what I think about a lot of the social things. 100% our community needs them, but should we be delivering them? Yeah.
I'm just looking at this expenditure again, the jump from our annual plan or our real numbers this year until this year's 24 million. And obviously the big items are the one that I mentioned, personnel charges, but also other expenses at 3 million, which probably, the way as it was explained, that should have decreased. In finance costs, well, I assume, we're locked into those higher interest rates for a period of time until we can't get back into a better band. And really the depreciation and amortisation is fixed in stone as far as I think it needs to be kept there at that level. But that represents 5 million. Out of the 24 million, the big number, the two big numbers are interest and personnel costs, and I still can't work out why we've jumped about 25%. And so that's the thing that we need to look at those big numbers, because that's where you're going to get the best bang for buck. So I think we need to review that.
So the finance costs in the budget in 2024 were too low. So the budget of 6, we actually came in at 10. So that was not budgeted.
Okay, so 14, is that going to improve?
Yes, so 14 is on the high side. Yeah, because we budgeted at 5.5% on all our debt, and currently at the moment our average weighted cost of capital is about 4.4%. So
can you roughly that 14 million is going to be what?
Off the top of my head, pass.
Well, is it going to be 12? It can't be that hard to work out. Well, even if it's a saving of 2 million, well, there's $2 million. Another 2 million on personnel, there's $4 million. All of a sudden, you're back in the green. See, if we're taking people on to replace contractors, there should be a business case around that, meaning it's more beneficial for the ratepayer to do it that way. So therefore, there should be savings.
What's missing here is the actual result year to date. Year to date, we have a deficit of 500,000 against a planned deficit of, I think it's about 2.6 million. So we're about 2 million ahead of budget. I could have that wrong. CFO will know that better than me. So effectively, we are pulling costs back or increasing our revenue. That will continue then into the review of the 25-26 to bring back to you.
One thing, just heading back to one of Councillor Shannon's questions on what the impact might be on some of the levels of service. We do have, particularly the roading one's a really good example, their asset management plan, which I think you guys have all seen in the past prior to the LTP sign-off. So that shows what impacts will be on different levels of service with different funding applied. And also it explains, I guess, what good asset management is, and if you were to delay renewal of a certain footpath or road, what the impacts would be further down the line. So you might have increased maintenance costs. It might be a rehabilitation rather than a resurfacing in the future. So it's looking at those sort of things too. But yeah, and that's what all the other units are working on with the asset management programming, is getting their plans all sorted. So you've got that information to work with too. Any other questions from anyone?
I just had you asked about what our story should be. I had noted, obviously not these words, but, around tightening our belts and responsible spending, because that is what the public commentary was, leading up to the long-term plan. And I just feel like we didn't have enough opportunity in the long-term plan to make the changes we were wanting to make, and this is our opportunity to do that. So we might be a bit late to the party, but I think that needs to be some of our story, but of course it comes with a big but, in that we're at the same time we've got to enable growth. And so it worries me that we sit around this table and say you need to cut all the budgets, and then we come back and go, well, we've got no money to do that land development out there. And so I think it's equally important for us to know what's been taken out of the budget is what's in it, but how we tighten our belts yet enable growth is a massive challenge.
I think
Good to see both.
I think in response to that, there's two competing things here, isn't it? There's length of service, level of service. Now, to not trigger an LTP review, which triggers an audit, which comes at a cost, we should be trying to keep our level of service as good as possible for this year. But we should be moving ourselves, getting ready for the next LTP. So when that LTP hits, we know exactly what we've got to hit. It doesn't mean we don't pull the cost structures back. If we can pull the cost structure back, we do it. If we decide to actually, I'll use an example, and it is an example, the gym at Sea Bay. If we decide, well, actually, we're better off just leasing that facility to a commercial entity, and we get our, whatever it is, 200,000 rent a year, and happy days, let someone else operate then we can still do that because we're still delivering a gym. So we've just got to be smart about how we deliver these things without triggering an LTP review. Now, if we trigger one, we trigger one, but I want to try and keep away from it as much as possible because it creates such a workload.
And like you've pointed out before, the auditing of a plan and a budget is somewhat ridiculous.
Yeah, actually, just to expand on that point, and this is something Councillor Piddington raised last year, I mean, you've got a couple of things. You've got the gym, you've got the cafe. These are things that can be run by private enterprise. So we should be looking at them. If we can't run something, and, the cafe is a great example, if we can't run that at break even, well, then we shouldn't be running it at all. We shouldn't be running something like that as a service when the private market, when they can go around the corner and get the same thing going down to Copeland's or whatever the model is, or there's a different model within that has to be. So that, things like that have to be break even at the very least. Yeah, and those things are actually easy enough to do, and I know that is being looked at by the manager out there, which is great. But yeah, it should just never have got from a point from where it was, probably breaking even to, losing X. Yeah.
One other thing to clarify too, just on the levels of service. So with an LTP amendment, it relates to a significant change to an agreed level of service, so a published level of service, not an expected level of service. So there are expected levels of service within the community, and then there are the agreed levels of service. So advice is to be very careful what you touch with agreed levels of service, because these are the ones that have been audited, and if it is considered a significant change to a significant activity, so if you decide to no longer reseal any roads in the district, that would be an automatic LTP amendment. So yeah, just, I guess, refresh your memories on what is the agreed levels of service and possibly look a bit closer at expected levels of service. So that could be frequency of mowing the lawns. Not that we want to bring up mowing grass at the moment because it's a sensitive subject.
One thing I would like to look at, which is hugely controversial before the next long-term plan, is actually, I guess, our shares in Alpine Energy in the Port of Timaru. I mean, a complete study, because if it comes to Alpine, we're not getting a commercial return. I mean, the mistake they made last time is they couldn't tell us what they were going to do with the money, and it went round. But I'm talking seriously that if you think about it, someone is going to supply power to us. We don't have to own it. And I mean, the government are ratcheting down how much you can get as a return. So is that a smart investment? And I don't know about the port, but are those shares, no one's going to pick up the port and take it away. We're going to have it no matter which way it operates. But there's some serious money being lost by holding those two assets and the returns we're getting. Yes, TDHL are growing, mainly through property revaluations, their shares, but is that actually a smart way of operating? I don't know the answer, but if you're tweaking with things and you could actually save or earn $5 million more on the asset value of that, done properly, not by cowboys, should we be looking at it?
I think what's good, Stu, to start those conversations, certainly with the likes of Alpine, is as we go through the water review, people get to understand that their prices or, the prices for water will be set by economic regulation, which is sitting over Alpine Energy as well, and that is the protection, but that's also drives the price. So the lines charges go up all the time, and we have a wee whinge, and we are paying for what? We don't get anything back. You're right. And we're not going to for the foreseeable future, but we've got an asset worth X. I think it's 140 million. I think our shares in Alpine Energy, and so if you put that in the bank tomorrow, you'd be expecting what? I don't know. Yeah, 7-8 mil out of that. So no, it's a great question. But I think part of I 100% agree with you. We should be considering those things. But it's partly we've got a good opportunity to educate people so we can do those comparisons between water economic regulation and Alpine Energy and economic regulation. But really important.
My only thing to that would be, like the port is one of our greatest assets. And so losing control of one of our greatest assets would be of concern to me. So it would, Alpine, I don't know, but definitely the port is one of our key.
Well, I'd argue, Stacey, the port has gone brilliantly since the Port of Tauranga got half a share and told the shipping lines where to come and go. Otherwise, we were flailing in the breeze. But I mean, that would be part of the discussion. I'm not saying yes or no, but let's see what the return is, and the return might be fine. I'm not saying sell them, but I'm saying have a discussion.
I agree with you.
Around, because suddenly if we could add $6 million a year to our income every year and still have the money in the bank, why wouldn't we be doing that?
I agree, that is a topic for the next LTP that should be really investigated. Great consultation subject.
But to the Mayor's point too, water's going that way. We're forced that way by the government. Alpine Energy is delivering a service exactly the same, so there is no difference.
I might just jump to see if Councillor Oliver has any questions or anything he wants to talk about.
No, I'm all good at the moment.
Okay.
Sorry, just Gavin did share some similar concerns around some of the challenges within our parks area out at Geraldine, sort of similar rinse and repeat that hasn't been dealt with. So those are things that we do need to urgently get on top of, because the complaints that are just keep coming through, and it seems really simple to be able to deal with it.
I think the sheer frustration for me is that who's accountable for auditing all these things? Because it's the auditing of them that keeps the maintenance to a level that works for our expectation of those contractors to be working to. So I don't know who's auditing some of the stuff, but they've either got their eyes shut when they drive past things, or they're not auditing them at all. So I guess for me, I look at, we put a brand new footpath in between Peel Forest and Bleenswood. I had a complaint yesterday of some photos. It was 2 metres long. Now it's down to a single trail because the weeds have encroached the path that much. there's been not one bit of maintenance done on it since it's been built. I mean, who's responsible for that? And I agree with Nigel. You know, who is responsible for that? And if they're not doing the job properly, what are we doing about it?
Well, it's simple. We take the asset and we put it into planning within our own system. So I would have thought it was pretty easy. Anyway, we can move on from that subject.
Cool, so if there's no other general discussions, I might get Brendan up to talk about some non-possible policy amendments. They're quite minor, but good to get them in front of you guys so you can have a think about the impacts.
I'm just going to hand something out very quickly. So. Yeah. I just didn't know whether or not you'd have it immediately in front of you.
Steph, could you click the PowerPoint?
I'll give you your commission later, Your Worship. Always good to see enthusiasm for policy. So good afternoon, councillors. This session is just to basically put in front of you two policies that officers consider may be worthy of amendment as part of the annual plan process. When the word came out, look, if your area has things that you think might need to be tweaked as part of the annual plan, speak up. These were two that came to mind. So the first is significance engagement policy, a potential introduction of one part there, and the second is around revenue and financing and proceeds of asset sales. So I'll go through those in turn. I stress it's just to put it on your radar, to educate you, to get some initial thoughts and guidance to help inform any potential changes as part of the annual plan process, and to allow officers to prepare additional advice, because I will stress we haven't gone to the nth degree in terms of advice at this initial stage. So firstly, in terms of the significance and engagement policy, one thing that I believe would be quite useful would be building a section into that policy around submission rules. Basically, what do we count as a submission? How do we allow people to give us feedback on anything that we consult them on? Now, on the one hand, that sounds very simple, but when you dig into it, it isn't really. Allow me to explain. For example, there's criteria that we could set around treatment of late submissions, which we're currently silent on, or the minimum requirements that we have for submissions, because we do get people that, for example, just submit their initials, and we then have to think as officers, is that satisfactory? My view would be that it isn't, because the entire point of a submission process is that it's public, that people are accountable for their views. We also get, for example, offensive, defamatory language provided as part of submissions. Is that appropriate? If we take the current Treaty Principles Bill that's before Parliament, I mean, that's an excellent case of where it's been cited quite publicly. You know, that sort of language is not appropriate in submissions and will not be accepted as part of submissions. That is the usual fare for Parliament and for other organisations, but we currently don't have anything in place around that. There's also, for example, how we might manage informal feedback that we receive that might be outside of the formal submissions process, for example, social media, or if we think of last year's representation review, you know, we got a number of petitions around that. Now, how we manage that informal feedback is important because it impacts a few things. Firstly, how officers frame up information and advice for you and put that before you. Secondly, how we count who we've heard from, and the representation review is a good example of that. Did we hear from 50-odd people who made submissions, or another 200 people who signed a petition about, in that particular instance, a small part of the wider consultation? And for those people that provided informal feedback, they weren't aware of our privacy statement, how their information would be used. They haven't provided informed consent, for example, for their information to be on agendas and websites and things like that. So there are a few sort of aspects and fishhooks here for us to think our way through. The reason why I bring it as part of this process is because I see that this is an opportunity to tidy this up and also to allow you to reflect on whether you think there's a gap at the moment or whether you think things are fine. I'm going to be quiet now and just let you ask any questions or have any discussion.
I agree, we do need obviously to have something formalised, have a policy as such. But what this highlights to me as well is we need to somehow capture what we call the informal feedback on everything going forward. And we've all learned, you know, right from what the Electoral Commission's looking at to submissions and what have you, that the old method of doing things is not necessarily fit for purpose nowadays. And you only have to, well, Mr. Doran will know, on our Facebook page, our frequent flyers versus every now and then, wow, that's a great idea. That's a good point. And, you know, there's different methods of providing feedback that work really, really well for contemporary New Zealanders. So at the same time as we're doing this, and I know this is probably the hardest part, how do we capture that information, even through a formal process like this, or an informal process? And I can see Mr. Doran's already got something to say about this.
Well, I'm just acknowledging that is one of the challenging bits when it comes to these things, and it's been that for a number of years now. Particularly, you do find out long-term plan processes where we are listing feedback on certain topics. Actually, getting that feedback to you is quite challenging. Is it one submission? Is every single person who's stuck the like button vaguely liking it, or do they just like the way we've phrased it? It's one of the opportunities we have looking into this again is sort of taking a steer from you as to what level of comfort you have with that informal feedback, and the weighting that you want to put on something like, I mean, say the Arangi Stadium gym had lots of people coming and signing up and coming in on a stock letter. How much weighting do you want to give to that sort of thing? And then it's just working out all the sort of privacy shenanigans around that as well, as people are quite surprised when their name suddenly then appears in an agenda. So it's the systems we've got in place at the moment and our policies, it is based around when someone would come in and write down a formal submission on a form in the format we would like it, and submit it to us in the proper manner, but that's not really the reality we work in these days. And I think if you, on principle, want to hear from as many people as possible, we do need to kind of loosen our rules and facilitate that where we can.
I probably have a slightly different view in what is the problem we're trying to solve. And as councillors, we will get our community feedback in many different ways. And so often in the past when people give me feedback, I put a submission in because I'm only one councillor and the other 9 councillors don't hear this feedback. But, you know, Stu gets a lot of feedback from his community. I might look on Facebook and take in that. And so we're still here to make decisions on what we think is best for our community. And we will base that on not just submissions that are presented to council. You'll base that on what you hear down the street, what you see on Facebook. So I get that it would be nice for it to be nice and tidy and for be able to go 75% of people thought this, but it's only ever 75% of people who submitted. And so I'm kind of going, what are we trying to fix here? I'm not sure.
It's fine, I can definitely speak to that. In one sense, I think that there's an opportunity. In the other sense, I think there's a problem. So they're two distinct things. The opportunity is to provide clarity to the community, to officers, in terms of this is how you get your views before council officially as part of the agenda, ensure that there's officer advice as part of that, that it forms part of the recommendations, etc., and tidy that up. In terms of the problem, if we perceive it as that, it would be more in terms of we do get people who are confused as to whether or not what they have provided, shall I say, on Facebook or via a petition actually does count as a formal submission, or whether or not they can say something that, what's the best way of putting this diplomatically? For the representation, I'll give you an example instead. For the representation review, we had someone who made a submission that was totally off topic. Without necessarily having a formal policy around that, decided, no, it's off topic, we're not going to progress that. And then that person was confused, annoyed when their submission wasn't put forward. There's also, shall I say, efficiency issues. When we had, again, an example, the LTP last year, when we got the petition, those 200-odd people for the stadium gym, trying to track those people down, figure out what did you mean by that, how can we use your information, do you understand the privacy implications, da-da-da. That does add time. From my perspective, if there is an opportunity to tidy it up, to provide clarity to external submitters, to provide potential efficiencies for officers, particularly if there is something like I think in the Northern Regional Council policy that is relatively good, clear, and that we could adopt without much time or effort, then to me that's a quick win.
And this doesn't really cover the people that pull you up in the corner of Tamika New World on a Wednesday. That's the sort of the expectation that goes around these things, that you will act with some knowledge of the community that you're within. This is really that formal level of when we're doing the set pieces that we do every couple of years.
The law does provide the opportunity to redact such things. So, I guess, where do you stop with all these policies? I think you just go on and make a policy about a policy, so I'm not too worried about it, to tell you the truth.
I think the point Brenda's making is that this does tidy up for formal submissions, for our LTP, for any formal things. Any feedback, that's going to happen anyway, and it's not covered by this. It's just feedback. And I think that this possibly puts a higher standard of your submissions.
May I ask if there's any thoughts on the content of the Northern Regional Council policy in terms of, for example, their approach to late submissions, or how they might manage minimum requirements for a submission? I'm not sure whether you get any feedback from your own networks and communities about how easy or not easy it is for them to engage with council through our formal processes.
I guess I'm a bit like Alan, why are we creating this monster? But I get the CE's point that to the formalised thing, but if we start dictating you can be 3 days late or you can be 1 day late, it all gets pretty messy in council, because not everyone's in tune with how we do things. And, I'm a bit concerned you'd give weighting to a formal one versus an informal one. I mean, your friend Mr Cricklewood might want to do it anonymously, Stacey. I'm just not sure where it all lands. And if we're trying to capture everyone in the community, we need to make it easy as we can.
I was just thinking about that, is what is the outcome we want? And as a councillor, I want to hear all and every feedback, and as much of it as we can, and I don't care if it's a day late or 3 days late. But I'm just wondering, this is submissions and this is feedback. And yes, if you're making a submissions, these are kind of the rules, but you can give us feedback at any time, and people do, whether we like it or not. And I'm just wondering if we need to make that distinction, because I always want as much feedback as you can at any point in time. And so I guess we need to be clear about that. And yes, I see the benefit in having guidelines around formal submissions, but I don't want to put people off. And so does it become just guidelines, not a policy? I don't know, and I'm thinking about, profanities and foul language. I don't accept that, but are you going to chuck their whole submission out, or just the bits that include that? There's some things like that I think we just need to be thinking about, because I'm with Councillor Piddington. We need not to be putting barriers in the way of the community for giving us feedback.
Two comments and observations. Firstly, you quite rightly identified that there's formal feedback, formal feedback, shall I call it, which is what officers deal with as part of a formal process. And then there is, in my view, there needs to be a line drawn somewhere to say anything outside of that or beyond that point is considered informal, and that's dealt with separately. For example, emails that you receive on particular topics. So what this is trying to do is to try and identify where that line is, to make it tidier for officers and the public in terms of engaging with formal processes. The second thing, I've lost my train of thought there. There was a second thing. It might come back to me.
Can I then suggest that when you have a look at the scope here, then it's not a feedback bracket submission policy, and when you look at the scope, it says this policy only relates to feedback made on consultations carried out in accordance with requirements of the LGA, etc., where it says all voluntary processes where feedback is invited. You just get rid of that. You just apply it to the formal stuff.
Absolutely, and the intention would be that we would basically just set, incorporate a section into the significance engagement policy that sets, it's a few lines that effectively says this is what this is our position on late submissions, this is our position on profanity, etc. And I did remember the second point I was going to raise for you, Councillor Pye. You asked, for submissions that have profanity, etc. Do we, throughout the entire submission, do we just redact that? But my response to that would be, that's exactly why we want to put something like this in place, so that it is clear for the public and officers as to what your expectations are as to how you receive this information and what's put in front of you versus isn't. If we don't have that in place formally, then us as officers have no guidance. We're basically making our best professional judgment at the time, and you as elected members don't necessarily have assurance as to your receiving what we have received formally, if that makes sense.
The scope still relates to just feedback. It doesn't, in this example that you've got, it doesn't actually say formal versus informal. And I still think we need to have a really good think about that. I'm not sure.
I think one of the key parts of it is it takes a level of formality to trigger the significance and engagement policy, that we have a matrix, and that's, a good example is the annual plan we're doing at the moment, that we're trying our damnedest not to trigger the significance and engagement policy, because back process, whereas at the level we are pitching at the moment, we can just go out to the public and say, here's what we're planning for next year, what do you think about it?
And this policy, to be clear, the example that I use from Northland, we wouldn't necessarily copy it holus bolus, but it says it only relates to feedback made on consultations carried out in accordance with the requirements of the LGA. So feedback here refers to formal feedback as part of a submission, a consultation, not necessarily emails to councillors, Facebook, etc. So just wanting to be clear on that. The fact that they use the word feedback slightly differently to how we might use it is possibly muddying the waters there. Yeah.
And that old magical word discretion in there isn't there often enough anyway, and that's one of the keys, isn't it? This isn't like a recent thing that's already been all over the news and everyone tried to hand in their homework on the same night and crashed systems. This is about LGA-specific stuff, the formal stuff, and it's still always throughout. I can see, if you change the word feedback, when you're talking about in terms of lateness, profanity and the like, so long as the discretion is in there as well, then you can do with it as you please and still fit within the rules, can't you?
Yes, you can absolutely build into the policy that there's the ability for discretion or, around, for example, late submissions and things like that. Like if I think of the community funding policy that we just passed, it says, effectively, we want applicants to put their applications in on time, but the committee, the funding body, might accept late applications at the committee's discretion if they think there are extenuating circumstances or things like that. So none of this is, I would say, binding your hands. It's just providing clarity in an area that we're currently silent on, and that I view as becoming increasingly problematic because, to Stephen's point, people are engaging with us in a range of different and increasingly dynamic ways, and it's becoming harder for it to be clear what do we treat in this particular way and what is outside of that scope and da-da-da. So, yeah.
Comment on the example that you've got in there. I was a bit nervous about the project owner having the discretion on whether to accept or not, because they could be unconsciously biased, and it could set them up for failure, which is what you don't want. It would be far better to have someone a little bit more independent within make that decision rather than, hey, here's this cool project I want to do, tell me what you think, but no, I'm not going to accept those 3 late ones because they were negative. I think if we do adopt a policy, that needs some thinking about.
Absolutely. I was interested, or wondering whether or not there'd be feedback on that. I think there's also the very last part of the policy under late feedback, point 6, it says, while the project owner has the discretion to refuse late feedback, the decision must be signed off by, in their case, the group manager for corporate services. So they build in an additional layer there. But I fully agree with you. We want to receive as much feedback as possible from, arguing any perspective rather than, in any way consciously or unconsciously trying to bias that.
I guess you've shot yourself in the foot, Brendan, because you've said there's so many dynamic ways of responding these days, which is great, and we're trying to formalise it in this little pocket over here. So I'm just concerned with that, and whether we have a system, because not everyone's online, it's all kind of that thing. And I see what you're trying to do, but I think we're solving a problem, cracking a nut with a sledgehammer with this. We're just getting too complicated. What's the problem you guys have got?
I think it's
A living example.
It's about almost setting your expectations of what you will receive when you go out to consult as well. So say, a good example was from the LTP one, but last when we took the token boxes out, and then we presented you with a picture of the 3 token boxes beside each other and say this is the one from the farmers market, that was a clear thing for. That wasn't in any way formal, it was just our reckon, but we presented that as a thing. So it's sort of setting the expectation in the room that there will be probably an increased level of informality just by the nature of people's thing, but it's almost formalising that informality, which sounds ridiculous as you're saying it, but it's just getting that understanding of that people can approach the council in a slightly less formal way, but it will still count. But this is your opportunity to really set what you want to see at the end of the day. Do you want that higher level of informality, or do you want everyone who has filled in boxes A, B, C, D and signed the bottom sort of thing?
Is it actually more a case of horses for courses? So if we're going out with the LTP, with our consultation, we would actually say in there, this is how we want to receive the feedback, and here's the rules. Whereas you go out to consult on a major vertical build, you might do it slightly differently. You might. So I'm just wondering whether actually it's more about making sure that each different consultation we do, that you're actually setting up, this is how we want to receive it, rather than having a policy that covers all, that for some may not be appropriate.
So in my mind, if I can answer that, the sort of levers that I have in my mind, which are stated up there, would, in my view, across the 3 years that I've been at council, apply to any project that we do. To your point, in terms of, say, a Strathallan corner redevelopment versus an LTP, we'll say, you can engage with us in different ways for that. That's perfectly fine and legitimate, but there's still the same rules would apply in terms of we need it by a certain date, or you need to provide XYZ information around that in terms of your name and a contact detail or whatever. To your point, Councillor Pillington, around a couple of real examples, as I've mentioned before, so the representation review last year and also the LTP last year, in terms of how some people engaged with that, expected that it would be treated as a formal submission but didn't meet a lot of the requirements that we needed for that, did create a lot of, it did take a lot of time to try and sort out in the back end. I appreciate that that's not something that's necessarily visible. Like I said at the outset, the point around this set part of the workshop is just to put it in front of you as a potential to get your thoughts and your views. Certainly not asking for any decisions, but to try and educate you about something. You might see that it's not an issue, that the status quo is fine, or that something else needs to be done. We're here for that feedback.
I'm keen to make it easy for you guys, but not make it difficult for those that want to give us feedback. So, the pendulum swings, There's plenty of profanities I get at the supermarket, so I'm not too worried about that and roundabout, So, yeah, I get it, but I don't want to force it that people go, because I have people saying now, a bit like Michelle, I submit to oh, God, I can't be bothered with that, can't find it, my laptop's not, there's a balance to everything, I guess,
I think, that the public holds us to certain standards, right? And so I think that we have to hold them to a certain standard as well. And, when it comes to things like defamatory statements and offensive profanities, I don't think we should have to deal with those at all. And I think that people should understand that they shouldn't be allowed to make a submission with that sort of language in it. I don't think that's a tough call at all. I think that's just common courtesy, isn't it?
So with, if the profanities come through, whether we have a policy or not, are we going to redact them? We're likely going to redact them no matter what, surely.
Well, currently, it's because the policy is silent on it, it's frankly officer best judgment on a case-by-case basis, but there's no formal basis for us to do that. So you might end up with something that surprises you, frankly, in addition to the other ones. If I may just respond very quickly to Councillor Pillington, again, perhaps that's a good challenge for us as officers, your point around provide clarity for the public and assist officers to be efficient, but do it in such a way that doesn't constrain, potentially, the ability for people to make submissions or their ease of use. We can go away and do some work on that and present that back to you. We can say to other councils, hey, look, what have you done in this area? What's been your experience? From what I have seen looking at this initially, I can't necessarily see any reason why introducing, for example, those 4 sorts of things into our policy to provide clarity around existing formal submissions would necessarily hamstrung anyone from emailing you, talking to you at New World Temuka, making a comment on Facebook, etc. So we'd still get that wide range of views, but very happy to take up the challenge to see if there's a better way of doing it. Absolutely.
This is actually no reason to do it, but if you did have a submission that you chose for whatever reason to not listen to or whatever, and then if they went to the Ombudsman, the very first thing the Ombudsman would say to us is, could we have your policy, please? And we'll go, we don't have one.
Okay. Cool. Moving on then, if I may. The revenue and financing policy. So through the discussions late last year with the property acquisition, management and disposal policy, draft version, it was identified that there might be opportunity to make a couple of tweaks to this policy and propose that as part of the annual plan process. So I'll just go through those 2, and then I'm very happy to open it up for discussion. I've also done a little bit of background work around what some other councils do in this area. It all relates to how the proceeds of asset sales may be used. Firstly, in terms of the activity that they may or may not be spent on, And secondly, how that may or may not relate to CapEx versus OpEx. So those are the two things that we're looking at here. Also happy if you've got any other views on revenue and financing policy, of course, for us to discuss that. But those are the two that we propose to discuss. Before I dive into that, I'm just going to ask Andrea to provide a little bit of context around what we mean by assets in this context, because I know that came up in that property discussion, and also how that might dovetail with strategic versus non-strategic assets.
So I guess from a finance perspective, an asset could be numerous items, whether it's physical, intangible, financial. Cash is technically an asset. We have investments, which are technically assets. So this here is talking about if we were to dispose of any of those assets, the cash that we receive from those assets, what can we do with it? So I'm proposing that we add into 6.7 a line where we could use it to repay debt, because it's quiet in there as to repay debt. And I'm proposing that we actually remove the associated with the activity which held the original asset, because I think that might have been relevant back in the day where each individual category of assets were all, one, looking after themselves, whereas now we're council-wide. So there might be areas where they're more than happy with everything that they've got, but there's other areas within council that are lacking and actually need funding. So I'm proposing to add that we could repay debt, remove the associated with the activity which held the original asset, and therefore 6.8 would also become null and void.
Is there a particular reason why, have you struck something that's been a problem?
It came out when we looked at the disposal of property last year. We did a workshop on that with Elliot, and it came out that if they sold the property, then that money stayed within that area, because it refers back to the revenue and financing policy. And the revenue and financing policy says that actually that's how the proceeds of asset sales are to be dealt with. We're proposing that actually, there are other means for the money to be used more prudent.
Considering selling some properties, we should be tidying this up before we do that.
Main reason why, and because that would then flow onto that policy as well. Yeah.
And what that would then mean, if and when council resolves to sell an asset, at the same time you resolve what to do with that funding, because the funding when that asset was originally purchased, etc., was provided to that particular activity, and it requires a council resolution to then determine, as an example, purely an example, let's just say the Theatre Royal hadn't gone ahead last year and you were selling that particular site. I would assume that was tagged as part of a community services activity or the like. You might, at your discretion, say, we would rather use that to repay debt. We believe that is a higher priority at the present time, but you'd need to resolve that would be how you would treat it. Anything else you wanted to say about definition context assets?
That's it, you can stop now.
Okay, cool.
I 100% agree, and I'm just trying to go back and look at my notes, because I thought we had this discussion at the LTP when we reviewed the policies, but maybe we didn't. I'm kind of looking at my notes about what borrowing was used for and things like that, but yeah, agree.
I can just say, so I did a sample of 9 other councils, big, small, geographically around us, etc., and the vast majority of them, 6 of the 9, provide that discretion to use it, for example, repaying debt, etc. Only 1 of those...
Brendan, it makes total sense.
Okay, just doing my job. All good, understood. The second part is just around CapEx versus OpEx. So at the moment, this is 7.2 in the policy. It says, councils determine that the following sources may be used to fund operating expenditure, and proceeds from asset sales as part of that list. Now, to be clear, the LGA provides council the ability to use proceeds from asset sales to fund OpEx, but some councils put additional guardrails in place. I think the rationale that they use for that is to say it wouldn't necessarily make sense or be prudent to sell an income-generating asset to pay to keep the lights on, because that won't be a recipe for success in the long term. So the question then for council would be, are you happy with the existing policy where it provides you with that greater discretion, or do you think that it needs to be tighter? And like some other councils do, again, in my sample, about a third of them said that it would only be used, proceeds of asset sales would only be used for CapEx. A third said it would be either, but they usually impose limits, saying that it would be, for example, only in extenuating circumstances used on OpEx, and the other three were silent on it, basically saying proceeds of asset sales will be used to fund debt, which is separate to the conversation that we've just had.
I'll just take it out altogether if you get to that point. World's not looking great, so you'll need to change your policy or go through some major overhaul, so I'll just take it out.
And a slight change to 6.7, so we would just take it out of 6.7 as well. Yep.
I know we've got that generic slide we finish everything with. Any questions? What I did want to just get a slight better understanding of is what you want to come to the next workshop. Do you want the financial chat, or do you want the services chat, or do you want a kind of amalgam of both? Because you will, as Steph said earlier, you will get the forecasting earlier on in the day as part of the commercial and strategy meeting. So you can either sort of consider that in a slightly more free-form manner at the start of the workshop and then move on to levels of service, or you could just focus on levels of service. It just help with our preparation, what you prefer.
As Councillor Piddington said, there is a bit of chicken and egg stuff and all of that, and I would like to think, based on what you've heard today, that we could discuss all of that. Personally, I would, even if that's a big day, because I want to get this annual plan right.
Yeah, we've only got an hour and a half that day because it's the same day as standing committees. That's why I thought, do you want to carry on with finance chat, or do you want to pivot, talk about...
Well, we'd already decided that. We're bringing back three scenarios of 5%, 8% and 10%, and what that means.
We can do that.
And when I say that, that's your rates, but your fees and charges will be the biggest conversation.
I'm with the Mayor though. Our community has said user pays. Now that might hurt some people at the airport or certain places, but we need to get real with what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Awesome. Well, if there's any more questions, or if there aren't any more questions, that's the end of the workshop. So thank you. We will go away and get the calculators out, get some scenarios back to you. Or should I say Andrew will get the calculator out?
Alrighty, so that's everything. So we'll finish up, and if everyone just stays for a couple of minutes, I'll have a quick chat before we go. But thank you if you're listening online, and thank you for first workshop. Be a busy few months ahead, so thanks very much. Signing off. Cheers.